Thanks everyone for joining. And as Catherine said, we're going to talk through how companies can build their data teams to optimize the intelligence cycle. If you just bear with me for a second, there we go. So how could we build our data teams to drive more value in our organizations? And how could they do this potentially by redistributing their time? And then so who are we and why are we talking to this? So I'm Archit, and as Catherine said, I work at Snowplow as Solutions Architecture Lead. Snowplow is a data collection platform that allows you to track event data from multiple platforms and store it in a raw format in data stores such as your data warehouse. And the solutions architecture team that I work in, we work with our customers to help them design tracking, build out data models, and do overall solutions architecture around the Snowplow product. And I'm joined by Darren.
Yeah, so I'm Darren. I'm head of engineering at Autotrader. I actually look after our data platform, so obviously makes sense that I'm here. For those that don't know, Autotrader, we're an automotive marketplace in the UK. We're actually the largest automotive marketplace in the UK. It's probably likely that if you're in the UK and you've bought a car, you've probably used our platform and kind of used that to buy a car.
Awesome, and so we heard from the team at Data Champions that there was a poll feature. So I figured why not use it to actually understand more about all of you listening, because we can't see all of you. So it would just be nice if you could select here what team are you part of? Who are you? Are you in a data platform delivery role? Are you part of a team that consumes the data and drives end business value like marketing or product, or are you in another business area? So it'd be great if you could select the option there. Oh, do I need to? It's not live. Awesome. I'll give it a minute for everyone to select and then go on to the next slide. Oh, so an interesting mix. More people from the other business area than I would have expected, but great to hear a lot of people from data platform and delivery, and yeah, I'd be really interested to hear questions from sort of all three business areas, and hopefully we can tailor what we're going to talk to this distribution here. So yeah, excited for you all to have joined. Awesome. So while you're getting that up, I'll talk through at least the points we're going to cover today. So in the title of our talk, we reference this idea of an intelligence cycle, and it's not sort of a well-defined term. And so we're going to start off by actually talking to what we mean by the intelligence cycle, and then we'd like to cover what is it the data team, what are the pressures the data team faces, and how are those related to the intelligence cycle. And then with those challenges in mind, we want to talk to how data teams might be able to redistribute their time to drive more value in the organizations. And what does this mean for how our organizations work and how we consume our data? So starting off with the intelligence cycle, Darren, just let me know when you're ready and you can jump back in, but I'll take it in the meantime. So today's leading companies are increasingly data driven. Our companies are not only they're not only hungry for data, they're making their decisions based on the data they're collecting, and this is true for all companies, not just ones in the tech sector, but companies across the board, established retailers, established companies from all around the world. They're making more and more decisions based on the data they're collecting from their digital products. And this is a really important change that's occurring in our times. And as more and more business goes online through digital products, we're becoming more and more data-driven. Hopefully not necessarily news to everyone at a data conference. But it's important to note that data alone is not going to guarantee success. It's not just about collecting data, and that's not where the decisioning stops. We need to make sure that the data we're collecting, the data we're using, the data we're analyzing, and insights we're deriving are fully aligned to our business goals. And this is really key. It implies the decisions we need to make around data mean that we need to be deliberate. We need to be deliberate about the decisions we make, and we need to make sure they're aligned to our business goals. And this is sort of really important framing for the rest of this talk, is that a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is around making deliberate decisions around our data architecture, around our data strategy, and how we spend our time in our data teams. So the first thing to talk about is, as I said, we need to define the intelligence cycle. So up on the screen, we've got sort of an image of hopefully sort of a process that you're quite familiar with. This idea of a pipeline that takes data from your digital products and helps your companies make decisions off of that data. And so we've broken it down into these 4 stages, into collecting the data, perhaps using an SDK in your digital products, in your phones, in your users' phones, in apps, in websites, processing the data, which by this we mean moving it from your users' products into a place where you can understand it, prepare it, analyze it, and then preparing the data. So getting that data that's now landed in a place where it's usable and preparing it for the rest of the business to use and understand. And then finally analyzing it, actually deriving insights from the modeled, from the prepared data. And this is a little bit conceptual. So using a specific example of user tracking, how might this look for someone using Google Analytics? You might set up some tracking in Google Analytics using Google Tag Manager. That's your collection stage where you're capturing hit level data or session data. And then so the data is taken into GA, is sent to GA to process, maybe exported into BigQuery and prepared, and then analyzed using BI tools or advanced models, and decisions taken off of that. And I think that's probably a good point to hand over to Darren, where he'll talk about how this loops back in to be an actual cycle.
Sorry for the interruptions, Archit, and everybody that's viewing. It was a browser problem. I switched browsers. Everything seems to be OK now. So just carrying on from what
Awesome.
Archit was saying, so that kind of view earlier is what I would consider quite a typical view of a data collection pipeline, a way that we work with data. Now, if we just sort of think about this more as a cycle and just talk for a second about how organizations use data or should use it, all our companies have digital products, systems, applications, platforms, and they provide services to our users. And of course, each of these things, they collect data, and we're interested in that data. And we're interested in that data because it helps us make decisions. And these decisions really should be what we feed back into our product. And so this is really what we kind of mean by the intelligence cycle. So rather than that linear view, which is just sort of collection and so forth, actually starting to think about this more as a cycle with each of these components. They still exist, but the idea really is that we should be gaining insight and then kind of driving that back through into our products and using it to make decisions. And so there's a few observations that I've got about the intelligence cycle. And the first that's worth speaking about is this explosion of rich interfaces. I guess it's like pressure environmentally that's happening on this intelligence cycle. So if you think back over the last decade or some reasonable period of time, we've seen in the market, in society, an explosion of rich interfaces. We used to build applications, and for a lot of companies, it'd just be one system, one application, and that would be our business. And we'd have one touch point or one way that we engage with our end users. But now there's just so many ways that we can communicate. We might have Apple Watches, people use smart TVs, they've got native mobile solutions, the far more rich experience in browsers. And actually a lot of people are even starting to get into APIs and integrating with us in that kind of way. And then on the other side of that, I think our workforce is becoming more and more data hungry. And I suspect part of this is driven by a change in society. It's now possible for me to sort of pick my phone up right now and Google the population of China or anywhere in the world and get an answer immediately. And I guess when we're working within our enterprise, we expect the same output when we're inside. So I want to be able to find out like the number of people that engaged with my product yesterday. I want to find that answer out instantly. The expectation of how I work with data has changed quite dramatically. So to culminate this together, I'd say that the goal of any data team within an organization is to optimize that intelligence cycle. That's really what the purpose is. And what I mean by that is they should focus on how we can make it more efficient, how we increase the reliability of that, how we increase the velocity. And I guess we've got these two pressure points that are happening now. So we've got these multiple touch points, this explosion in all these communication channels, phones, Apple Watches. And we've also got this increased demand from our organization because they're more data hungry and they want to know more information than they did before. So let's have a quick look at the data team in action. Let's play out a scenario here. There's lots of different ways of structuring your organization, but this is just one example. So say we've got a data platform team or some sort of centralized data team, the data team, and they have a lot of source teams that tend to interface with them, and these tend to be the people that provide data, provide these touch points. And then we've got other people that are sort of downstream of that who are interested in using the data to make decisions. And that would be the marketing team, the product team, maybe it's the security team, the list goes on. Now, we've got the marketing team, and they say, can I have a first touch model based on subscriptions, please? So they ask the data team for that, the data platform team. They say, yeah, sure, okay, we can prioritize that. And then they deliver that work. The data team are happy, they've nailed it, they've helped the marketing team. But what happens next? Well, the product team come along and they say, I want to attribute concepts of subscriptions. So again, the data team say, okay, and they serve their request. But then the marketing team come back and they say, can I actually have a bathtub model based on subscriptions and renewals? And now the data team's getting a little bit fatigued. And then we get to this final culmination of that. And this is where I think these two actors start to come into play. And now we've got a new team. They've realized I've got this new app. It's this Apple Watch app. And I've been asked to set up tracking and I want to start putting events out into it and sending out this information. And then on the other side, we've got a product team asking for information. And then the fraud teams come along and they've become really interested in working with data. And this carries on. And, you know, the data team is sort of this emoji in the middle where they're just overwhelmed. And I guess what I'm saying is the data team face a scaling problem as data source increases, as does the demand for the data, right? So I come from an engineering background, so I often think about this as an engineering problem. And that's kind of why I frame it as a scaling problem. We've got this increase in inputs, and we've also got this increase in the outputs that are expected of it as well. And the data team are really struggling with that. And so we need to be deliberate about where our data teams invest their time, because it's really hard to keep up with our data hungry teams, the marketing team, the security team, etc. So I'm going to hand over to Archit now, and he's going to talk a bit about how we might achieve that with being deliberate.
Awesome, thanks Darren. And so with this idea of redistributing the time that our data teams spend, it follows logically that we need to start by looking at where do data teams currently spend their time. And as Darren pointed out, we think that it's important for the data team to optimize the intelligence cycle. So where in the intelligence cycle are teams spending their time, are data teams spending their time? And actually, a lot of it, at least from my experience, is sort of at the prepare and analyze stage, where data teams are being sent requests to, as Darren said, like, can you give me an attribution model? Can you give me a table in this format? This, you know, it needs to be flat with these fields so I can do my funnel analysis. Can you give me this kind of raw data so I can run my machine learning model with these kind of data points? And so a lot of the work that the data team is doing is instead of really preparing, they're cleaning the data because they've pulled it out of some tool that they use to collect the data itself. It might be a full package analytics tool. They've used the export, they clean the data, they build out those end use cases. And they sort of conflate the two things because each piece of analysis will contain some sort of preparation and cleaning in it. And this is taking up a lot of the data team's time, is unlocking value from the data for these individual use cases. And as we went through, the demand for the data is just going to grow. And so this is not a scalable solution. So there are two changes that have occurred recently that allow for a redistribution of data team time to open up potentially the bottleneck and unlock value from the data for the rest of the business. So what are the two changes? The first is that we can now store raw data far more cheaply than we could before. So the cost of storing data has dropped significantly in the last years. And what this means is that we don't necessarily need to be collecting more data. It just means we can store raw data because we don't have to aggregate it today. And this is crucial because in a world where our workforce, where our companies, our end consumer teams are increasingly data hungry, and they're having increasingly refined appetite. They want better data, more data. What they want isn't necessarily more volume. They want raw data so that they can meet more use cases and do more complex analysis. So it's really important that because we can now store raw data more cheaply, that we do to be able to perform better analysis. The second change is that almost as a consequence of the first, that we can now store raw data more cheaply, that there's now a huge range of tools that allow us to work with raw data. You've got cloud solutions like AWS, GCP, Azure, that allow you to build and own data pipelines, your entire data stack in the cloud, and have full ownership of it. And Snowplow, the company I work with, the tool that we offer allows for raw data collection from multiple sources. And then there's these elastic cloud-based data warehousing solutions like Google BigQuery, Snowflake, that make it really easy to socialize and work on raw data. And then things like dbt to help you model it. And we're going to come onto that in just a second on the modeling stage. So what does this mean for how we can redistribute our time? So remember previously, we talked about data teams spending a lot of their time on preparing and analyzing data. But actually, maybe we can redistribute that time. We can look at what were teams doing in preparing. They were actually spending a lot of time cleaning. And they were cleaning because they were just working with the data they were given. But because we can now take full ownership of the data collection stack, why not allow the data team to control that bit? Why not allow the data team to make decisions about data collection and spend more time on data collection, solve that problem upstream? So if we assume the data team spends more time on collection, and that means they have to spend less time on cleaning at the prepare stage, they can afford to be far more deliberate and far more impact with how they prepare data for the rest of the business. And it means they don't need to spend as much time on analyzing data because teams can self-serve more easily, and data literacy will grow as access to good quality, good format data increases. And so taking those sort of two ideas in turn, this idea that we can spend more time on collection and better time on analysis. So if we start with collection, there's this idea that as our customers' experiences, as our user experiences become more rich, the data we capture needs to reflect this. And I made the point earlier that it's not about collecting more data, it's about collecting much better data and about thinking a lot harder about data collection. And this often manifests in these sort of three categories: that you need to think harder about governance, think harder about meaning and quality. And these are things that we spend a lot of time thinking about at Snowplow since we focus on data collection. And actually I've linked to an article at the bottom there that I highly recommend you read, which covers these three topics and how we think about structuring data in order to solve these three issues. And I wondered, if Darren, you could share how you've thought about these things at AutoTrader.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, by the way, but I'll try and give an example at least to help you understand. So one of the things that we at AutoTrader focused a lot on around this collection, and actually it was through working with Archit and other people at Snowplow, is trying to come up with this idea of sort of how we can schematize or structure some of these collection processes, and then trying to come up with these definitions up front. And that's really powerful, and it does really help with that governance aspect, because you can kind of have good conversations about, is it good data? Is it bad data? I don't know if anyone's heard of the term garbage in, garbage out, but I think that really resonates a lot with me with what can help with analytics. If we have really good data at the collection stage, the whole process just becomes so much easier. And it helps us have really good discussions about what does that mean. So someone says like a search impression, or they're talking about like a purchase. What is a purchase? And it also helps with quality, so we don't end up with passing bad data around the platform. So I've actually found that we spend a lot of our time at collection and thinking about collection, and it's really important because it just helps the whole process from then on, and just cuts away a lot of the time you waste by trying to gather the meaning much further down that pipeline, for example.
Awesome. And so if we assume that sort of as Darren laid out, and hopefully as you read the blog I linked to, that data collection is something you spend more time on, and so you can assume that the quality of the data is going to be better when it lands in your storage targets, and you're actually going to work with raw data. Rethinking data preparation becomes really powerful and really important. And there's 4 things I want to cover here quickly, which is, first of all, centralizing data preparation. Secondly, thinking about data preparation as an internal product and being customer-centric about it. And then being deliberate about adding and imposing business opinion on the data in the data preparation stage. And then thinking about the right skill set to do all these things. And so the about centralized. I think it's important that we start off with this idea that we're going to start off with this raw data where we've collected it from all of our sources, transactional data, user behavioral data from all of our products, and that we think about data preparation as a central thing to the company, that we want to centralize and formalize how we prepare data and how we impose business opinions on it. And that way we can unlock all downstream use cases with a centralized effort. And it makes the way that we do this far more scalable and means that data preparation and the data team itself is not a bottleneck in the intelligence cycle anymore. And so if we look at this at a team level, it's important for a data team to own the proprietary data model. And when I talk about data models, by the way, I'm talking about sort of SQL scripts typically that are running in a data warehouse. That's a typical way we see them being run. There's obviously many other ways of doing that, but that's just to give you an idea of what we're talking about specifically here. So the data team typically would own that. And to think about it as a product, we need to think about who are the people interacting with this product, with this proprietary data model product. And it's source teams that we need to give requirements to. And then it's consumer teams, marketing, data science, fraud, product, and all the rest. We need to understand from them what are their requirements. So there's a big exercise in sort of communication, understanding what is it that would be helpful for those consumer teams, and what is it feasible to collect. And then understanding what is the lowest common denominator. What is the commonality across all those requests? And then formalizing that, building that into a proprietary data model that outputs a set of fundamental core tables that are foundational to the business's use of data. And so this is, in my opinion, a really important point, is being deliberate about adding business opinion to the data, imposing business opinion on it as you move through. And so once you go through the exercise of being quite customer-centric about proprietary data modeling and thinking about it as a product, and filtering out the requests and finding the commonality, there's a couple of business, I think there's a couple of business decisions or business definitions that are really important that sort of come out of this. And it's things like, how do we define a user as a business, a returning user, and how do we link an anonymous user to a known one? What do we define as a bot? Sure, we might have user agents, but also is there some behavior that we think is predictive of bot behavior? What is internal traffic? And then using bot and internal traffic definitions, can we filter that out before it gets to the consumer teams? Using a user's definition, can we stitch users before it gets to consumer teams? Then thinking about how we want to aggregate data, do we want to use an arbitrary unit of aggregation like a session, or do we want to think harder about, first of all, how we define a session, and maybe using a more meaningful unit of aggregation, like the events that occur between 2 conversions and aggregating events or hits based on that, and then using that to create sort of aggregation keys and adding that into the proprietary data model. And then also, of course, sort of conversions, like let's flag conversions in the proprietary data model. And things like this, these kinds of opinions are really important to add in at this stage. And the thing to call out is that they are unchanging or not frequently changing business opinions. What that means is that the data model itself can be really performant if it doesn't need to be frequently changing. It is this product that we can version, that we can build change logs for and build to be really performant, really robust. And all these sort of words I've just used are things that engineers are really good at. And so really it should be data engineers in this sort of central data team, this data platform team that build and maintain and design this data model. Because it requires rigorous testing, it requires this drive to optimize for performance. And of course, using the assumption that it's typically SQL scripts, that these good SQL scripts, SQL skills, and the ability for sort of engineering teams to work with ops teams really well, data ops in particular. And all of these things mean that if we build our data models using the right people, using the right inputs and the right upfront thinking, data preparation would not be a bottleneck. And therefore, we are optimizing the intelligence cycle by doing this. And if we look back at this, so what we discussed is sort of spending more deliberate and high quality time on data preparation, less cleaning because the data is already clean, and thinking about it as this performant incremental SQL data model in the warehouse that is versioned and tested and is therefore reliable for the rest of the business to use. And we think about it in a customer-centric way and impose core business assumptions only. And so if we just refer back to the sort of scenario that Darren laid out, that I've seen countless times that sort of the companies that we end up working with, is that actually the data platform team is no longer overwhelmed by all these requests, because if they've got a well thought out versioned proprietary data model, a lot of teams can self-serve. And as this ability to self-serve, or this ability to self-serve from good quality, well-structured, prepared and modeled data increases, the team's desire to self-serve increases and they become more data literate. And this is sort of a great positive feedback loop where you're unlocking more and more value from the data with time. And so suddenly this problem just doesn't seem so large anymore, because we've removed the bottlenecks that existed previously. And so taking a look back at what we discussed, we talked about these pressures facing the data team, that we're a more data-hungry workforce. We have more insight and data-hungry workforce. We want more data, and we want more out of the data itself as our workforce become more data literate and as we have more consumer teams. And that's on the sort of demand side. On the supply side, we've got more and more touch points, richer user interfaces, more and more digital products that our users can interact with us through. And the things that sort of enable us to combat these are that we have cheaper storage, and we've got so many tools that help us to work with raw data and be more deliberate about preparing data for the rest of the business, and be more deliberate about collection. Of course, data teams would still help with analysis, but it's about distilling the proprietary stuff, the unchanging business opinion, from the more frequently changing analytics opinions that are imposed on the data. And of course, the data teams will help with those. But then in the middle, we have this intelligence cycle that we can now optimize for things like efficiency, reliability, and speed, and unlock more value for organizations. And so just to wrap up quickly, that what does this mean for our data teams is that actually they now we know they sit between the source team and consumer teams, but they ought to design, maintain, and version the data structures we collect, and design, maintain, and version the proprietary data model. And these two things are strongly coupled, and it means they can be far more efficient and scalable. And so our key takeaways from all of this are that we really need to prepare for serving more evolving use cases from an increasingly data-hungry workforce. And the data teams can do this. They can drive the most value when they specialize in their tasks, when they use their skill set to optimize the intelligence cycle. And all we've done here is outline one approach. We've talked about using raw data to sort of divert time towards data modeling and collection. But of course, we'd now love to hear from you as well on how you solved the same problem, how you've optimized the intelligence cycle. So I think we'd like to open up for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. So let's have a look. Guys, do submit your questions in via the Q&A module. So we've got a couple here. Now, Darren, I think this one is aimed towards you. How have you built the culture of the team to be able to execute on the ideas you've discussed?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we've tried to a big attempt of what we've done is to try and build out what we call like a data academy, actually. So we try to help these teams on both sides be a lot more sort of literate or able to do more of the data tooling themselves. And there's a great thing that Airbnb wrote about this a few years back, and they said, I'm paraphrasing it, but you can't have a data scientist in every room, and what I mean by that is let's just take data science of that and just say you can't have a data person in every team, in every situation, in every conversation. And so to scale up your ability to deal with this, you need to teach more people how to work with data. So we put programs together like, what does good collection look like? And we do workshops and we show, this is what bad collection would be like. And it would create all these problems to work with data, and trying to get people to empathize with that. And we've done a raft of them around, good data modeling and other techniques. So if anyone's interested in knowing a bit more detail about it, I'm happy to connect after the call, after the conference, and share ideas.
Brilliant. And Archit, I think this one is aimed towards you. So you mentioned that since retaining them is difficult, how is this process perceived by data engineers?
Oh, yeah. So I think it's hard to retain data engineers, and they're a scarce and valuable resource for companies. And I think that the fact that data engineers are allowed to, in the solution we presented, specialize in the skills that are important to them, it means that hopefully the work itself is far more fulfilling, and because the data engineers, the data platform team can drive more value for the organization using these ideas of building proprietary data models as a product. It should hopefully mean that it is easier to retain data engineers. But yeah, hopefully it gives a lot more ownership to data engineers in our organizations.
Brilliant. And we've had one come in here about the self-service. So individual teams might not be able to self-serve. How do you get around this? Great question.
I can take this, Darren, and maybe I'll defer to you afterwards on how you've seen this at AutoTrader. But I think that there's two sides to this. Like, the first is that data teams themselves will continue to help build out full use cases for the consumer teams and build out attribution models, both product and marketing attribution models. But as the data the data teams prepare and becomes much better and of a better structure, I think people automatically look at that and become more eager to use it and consume it themselves, and they'll become more literate and data literate, and it will sort of be this self-perpetuating thing where, as it becomes easier to consume data and they see the benefits it can drive, they'll end up consuming more of it and being able to self-serve more easily. I don't know, Darren, if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah. So one thing that we've done a lot is try to treat our data like a product team. And so to do that, we've actually created personas for the types of people that work with our data. So we might have like a salesperson, a marketeer, kind of a business person, and then also a data scientist. And they have very different needs of data. And for them, self-serve could mean very, very different things. And so part of what we've done is identify these personas, think about that kind of training and coaching and how can we get them into a self-serve place. And at the same time, there is a tooling element as well. So we've also thought, right, well, what kind of tools would it take for a marketeer or somebody in our sales team or one of our executives to be able to self-serve that data? And the answer for that was to start focusing on modern BI solutions like Looker, and there are others out there as well. But for our data scientists, it was focusing more on like how do we make notebooking and sort of low-level access to data really, really easy. And so that really does open it up. And a bit of that's the user experience, is the UX aspect of how you get to work with data. So to kind of recap that, it'd be a tooling part, understand your users and what their needs are, and then try and focus on like how do you also teach them parts of that as well.
Brilliant. Thanks for these questions coming in. They're really great. So we've just had another one come in looking for both of you to respond to this one. What is your view on open source tools and technologies instead of using proprietary data warehouses?
Do you want me to have a go? It's both of us, right?
Yeah, I'll let you go first, Darren, to give me a bit more time to think.
Sure. So often I'm a huge advocate of open source technology, and I tend to definitely be biased towards open source if I'm perfectly candid. I think with data warehousing solutions in particular, I think it's okay to embrace something like Snowflake and BigQuery as examples, which are kind of proprietary to to the cloud providers or the tool. And I think it's okay with data warehousing because they're all effectively columnar data stores. They're all built around the same ideas and approaches. So generally speaking, if you go for one of these kind of more modern cloud data warehouses, like especially BigQuery, Snowflake, Presto, things like this, there's a similarity across them that I think there is a degree of portability in what you work with. But generally, the way we approach technology at AutoTrader, and my philosophy in general, is as much open source as we can. So we do use tools like Apache Spark and other open source things. But yeah, there seems the data warehouse in particular, there's just a lot of amazing technologies out there that are on the proprietary side. I think sometimes you have to embrace that and accept it.
Yeah, like I think I'd echo what you say around data warehouses, around because the tooling out there allows for quite a high degree of ownership, things like Snowflake and BigQuery, it often just makes sense to use those. But I think the reason I had to think about the response is because I work at Snowplow, which is an open source, it has an open source project where it's a data collection platform. But we do offer a managed service on top of that. So it is about, I guess, that there are a lot of benefits of using open source technology because of the open standards, because of the high degree of ownership you can have. And the comment we made earlier around this sort of cheap, this ability to store data cheaply in the cloud, it does make sense to use a lot more open source tooling so that you can have full ownership of that. So yeah, more or less echoing what Darren said, yeah.
One last thing to add, which is probably worth tying it back into our talk, but if you store the raw data in these data warehouse solutions, which they should allow you to do, that a lot of them make it easy to export the data as well. And that's actually really powerful because if you use a more older traditional approach and you kind of roll up data and lose it, then kind of going backwards and moving it elsewhere is actually a lot harder. So I think that's actually one of the nice things about the portability that they've created.
Brilliant. I think we've got time for one more, and this one's come in for you, Darren. What challenges at AutoTrader led to this approach with being deliberate about your data? Was there something specific?
I don't think it was one specific thing, but I'll try and describe the scenario. So AutoTrader have been around for a long time. We actually started out as a magazine. So in the UK, you would have been able to go to your local petrol station and pick up a copy of the magazine. And then we kind of embraced digital, and now we're a fully digital business. There is no magazine. So that's quite a long time to be operating as a company. And so we've definitely gone through generations of technology. And one generation of technology that we had was definitely a traditional data warehousing structure. And we definitely observed probably many years ago, it's about 3 or 4 years ago, these scaling challenges. So our teams were inundated with requests for the next report or a modification to a piece of insight. And so it kind of felt like sometimes they weren't able to do more strategic things, like how do we take our data strategy to the next level and really get the most out of our data. So we actually experienced these scaling problems. And we wanted to find a way out of doing that. And then, the industry has provided a lot of new technologies with cloud, and data science has become a lot more pervasive in our industry than it used to be. And so we wanted to just really, really embrace that. But the challenges we faced were exactly this. We had so many people wanting to give us data and so many people who wanted to work with data. The CEO of Looker has a great article about this. If someone pings me afterwards, I can share it. But he describes it like the depression. There's like a bread line and people are like waiting for their turn with the data team to ask a question. And I guess it was a bit like that. So people were sort of in a queue and being like, well, maybe I'll get the data team's time sometime this month. And it wasn't because they're not working hard. It's just scale.
Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thank you both for joining us. That was a really great session.